between some of the variation between individuals, but then also I'll unhide some of these other columns up here, and it'll be interesting to look at the migratory range average that was developed from your threat rankings and compare it to some of the other workshops that have been done focused on different areas. Any initial comments, reactions, discussions that happened in your group that anyone wants to share?
I have a few points that people brought up, but I'll let others jump in first.
Do you want to go on and share some thoughts, Christine?
Okay. There was a few things that people raised that either they felt weren't in the ranking once they got a chance to look at this in more detail. One of them was the potential for genetic degradation within hummingbird populations in terms of an example that David mentioned, changes in bill depending on what kind of flowers are or are not available. So that I don't think is actually listed as a threat. So that might be something to think about to add. I'm not sure, maybe we could discuss whether or not that's already covered, but felt that it wasn't. Number two, just a number of people brought up, and they gave examples in California, Oregon, and Arizona about loss of local and regional habitats due to illegal removal of habitat, essentially either by, the illegal activities, cartels, but not just cartel, and illegal clearing or growing things, grow ops. And this isn't just small scale. One example was in California that removed hundreds of thousands of acres of land that was habitat. So something to think about, not just a Mexican issue. The other one that people mentioned was just the loss, infringement on riparian areas, which are such key migration corridors. Just infringement, there's so many different types of stresses. I mentioned mining, and that leads me to my last point, which is a personal issue, personal comment, which is that I really feel like something that could be on this list is just lack of research on threats that are direct to hummingbirds, and makes it difficult to do these rankings as accurately as we like to do. I would think 5 or 10 years from now, we might have a better handle on this, but a lot of the research, when you look at it, relatively speaking, is on, hummingbird ecology, feeding ecology, physiology, flight mechanics. But I think there's this emerging hope that there'll be more research in the future that actually says, okay, what is this type of threat, and some of the things that are ranked low, example mining, but there could be others. Disease, we don't know enough about disease. So people always say more research, but I think more applied research on these different threats is something that's really needed and specific to how those things affect the birds and their migration. Those are some comments.
Thanks, Christine. I documented, or I tried to document what you said there, so we'll make sure some of that gets captured.
Plus also, anybody in my group could jump in to add if I didn't represent it entirely.
Great. Yeah, I think some of those pieces will be important, again, details that we'll want to add to some of the threats, or maybe deciding if we have maybe a little bit more of an umbrella term, like maybe you were saying, is that specificity wasn't there, making sure to draw out some of those examples of habitat loss or differences like that. We'll also make sure to circle back to the situation model for some of the examples that you brought up, like genetic degradation. And that might be something where we've identified the threat, but maybe we haven't done a good job of identifying the kind of biophysical effect that that threat is having, and some of the really tailored and really specific examples that you all have been able to contribute. And then for the research, I think we can look back and just see how to represent that, while also wanting to make sure that when we're thinking about threats, we're thinking about kind of direct threats on the species. And I know we've talked about it for the research of, you know, what type of research or how to conduct research as a strategy and leading to other strategies, knowing that we still need to make management decisions now. And hopefully we're moving towards more of a conservation planning process where we reflect and adapt this plan on an annual basis, if not more, so that that new understanding as each year goes on, because it sounds like there's a lot of, well, necessary research, it can be incorporated. Sarah E., I saw that you had your hand up.
Sí, muchas gracias. Bueno, creo que este es un excelente ejercicio y también yo expreso mi preocupación porque al parecer, bueno, no sabemos mucho de esas amenazas, pero mi preocupación va más allá del hecho de ver que en los sitios que hay monitoreo, pues las poblaciones pues a nivel local parece que disminuyen. Y otra de las cosas que se me vino a la mente es que cuando los colibríes estos migran, cruzan por varias áreas, grandes distancias, entonces, y cruzan a diferentes altitudes. Y estas altitudes, la diferencia en altitud te hace que te lleve a un tipo de amenaza diferente. Entonces, cuando yo tenía que priorizar, era pensar en la diferencia altitudinal que ellos están usando, todo el género Celasphorus rufus, dividida en altitud, el género de Calipte también, y resulta que se incrementa la amenaza en esos términos. Entonces, yo pensaría que tenemos que ver también como un vórtice de extinción, cuando tienes agregadas diferentes amenazas, porque cuando cruzan diferentes ambientes, y ya lo vimos en la zona de anidación, en la zona de invernación, eso va adicionando algo que te mete a un vórtice, ¿no? Y es el vórtice de extinción. Y entonces, por otro lado, tienes el que no hemos medido, cómo los colibríes se están adaptando a estos cambios. Y tiene que ver con su resiliencia, ¿verdad? Con que tanto pues, resistencia y resiliencia a nivel individual. Porque eso tiene que ver que también tenemos grandes movimientos, y cuando pusieron los mapas, que Celasphorus rufus antes no se tenía en la parte este, y que probablemente se debe a una u otra cosa. Yo fui alumna de Bill Calder hace 30 años y él estuvo buscando a Celasphorus rufus y no estaba hace 30 años o 35 años que él los buscaba en el lado este. Entonces, hay un cambio en la fenología, hay un cambio en la adaptabilidad, y eso es algo que debemos de medir. Resistencia, resiliencia, por otra parte, desde cada una de las especies. Eso es todo.
Thanks, Sarah. I agree with you that it's difficult to look at this at such a high level because we're looking across species. And so I think that we're trying to get kind of an understanding of these migratory hummingbirds as a sum. But I agree with you that there's a lot of important information to call out in each of the species. And so please feel free at any point to put that detail into the Miro board. And some of it is hopefully captured a little bit more behind the scenes in our situation model. I know I didn't dive into those details, but I agree with you. It's hard to rate threats when you're looking at a number of criteria and a number of species and rolling it up. And thanks, Christine. Again, I will save the chat and we'll look back through this to see if we need to call out any more detail or at least capture what that threat encompasses. Okay, we are getting close on time, so I want to make sure we glance at this quickly and then jump into thinking about some of our actions, right? And some of those strategies and start thinking about what's next. I just wanted to pop this up on the board so you all could look across some of the other categories that were, or some of the other workshops and some of the information that was collected throughout those. It's good, you can see that some of these different pieces were not rated in all of the workshops, but it seems like some of the more obvious pieces here are this climate change factor changes in precipitation and humidity. It looks like use of herbicides and pesticides, pretty high and consistent with urban development, agricultural expansion, and also really interesting to see where there might be threats that are a bit higher for certain regions, maybe much higher for the breeding range than, you know, a non-breeding range or whatever it might be. So thanks, everyone. I'll keep this open just in case you did want to look across it. I also saw some questions about whether or not people could add to this. It's a Google Doc, so please feel free to add to information or come back to something. We will try and capture where we left off from today, though. Okay. So in our Miro board, and thank you everyone, I see so many notes in here. Again, if it's on the board somewhere, even though we might not have time to discuss it today, just know that that information is being captured. We'll PDF this information and it will stay live online so that we can go back to it. If you add anything after the workshop today, we can also see that as well. So we don't want you to feel like this is your only opportunity. Okay, so moving up to kind of what we call our interventions or our strategies, right? Thinking about the action that we want to focus on. And when we're thinking about Western migratory hummingbirds, these are some of the strategies that have been brainstormed over the kind of past 8 months now. And they're pretty broad buckets. So I'm preemptively telling you that that may cause some frustration, but we want to start thinking about what are kind of the types of interventions that are going to be most compatible with increasing the health of these migratory species. And today we want to think about which of these strategies are most appropriate if we're thinking about the migration region and that migratory zone and that context. So I'm going to keep this up on the board here. We can give, again, a little bit more specificity if some of these are a little bit too broad. And I want to give you all just a minute to try and absorb some of the different interventions here that are here. Please feel free to write any more ideas in here. I will also put the link in to flash up most of these umbrella terms, I'm going to call them, came from a list of many different activities. So it's kind of a roll up of a lot more detail that's behind the scenes. So I'll be quiet. I'll put this link back in the chat, and feel free to just take a minute to absorb it or to add any comments, questions, detailed activities, whatever would be most useful. Sarah E, yes.
See your hand.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Muchas gracias. Fíjate que al revisar todas estas estrategias, yo creo que me gustaría que tuviéramos como una estrategia, por ejemplo, cultural, una estrategia política, una estrategia desde un punto de vista ecológico, de conocimientos, una estrategia relacionada también con con estos campos que pueden ser como base del desarrollo sustentable, ¿no? Pensando en que debemos, yo sé que desarrollo sustentable ya no se usa la palabra, un desarrollo regenerativo o, o algo que nos englobe, pero sí, bueno, esa es mi opinión, que todas me parecen excelentes y bueno, yo priorizaría en dividirlas para tener al menos una que represente algún eje de conocimiento, un eje cultural, un eje económico, un eje político, pues en eso es lo que quería opinar.
Thanks, Sarah. Those are all good suggestions and ideas.
Great. Yeah, and I think that hopefully, if there's any specifics you want to add here, Sarah E, about the what, please add them in. But I think once we think more about which of these strategies are kind of more important, then, or, you know, more impactful, then I think what your comment gets at is also kind of more of the how. So that's what I was also explaining to, you know, Christine, is when we're thinking about research, when we're thinking about, I've heard comments about social science, cultural awareness, any of these different things. I'm hoping that when we think about the how for some of these strategies, we're really making it a priority to think about those different facets. So I don't want to lose them. If there's any kind of the what pieces, like what we should do, that's getting lost, let's make sure to add it in. And I'm going to put this link in the chat here. That's the behind the scenes, the more in-depth actions that these strategies were developed from. It's a little overwhelming, but it's something you can come back to as well. I'll link it in the Miro board if you come back to it. But again, hopefully you see that there was a little bit more thought brought in than just kind of these umbrella terms that you're seeing right now. Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat or in the board itself. Any comments from folks or clarifying questions before we jump back into the spreadsheet? I want to make sure you have time to do some ratings and some chatting with your smaller groups. Okay. So for the strategies, just like before you had your different criteria, for this strategy, it'll be important to think about feasibility and meaningful impact. So what that means for feasibility is, what is the degree to which kind of the sum of the organizations, right? Not just one, what you all could do to successfully implement the strategy. This includes resources, which I know has been brought up before. And then meaningful impact, the degree to which the strategy will lead to the desired changes in the situation. So thinking about those two different pieces for the criteria. And then we'll go through, and this is the opposite in the sense that 4 is very high, meaning good, very high feasibility, and very high meaningful impact. So those are going to be kind of your top strategies. And then low is meaning that it's not very feasible and it probably will not have a big impact. A lot of times we rate these two things separately, and it can be a little bit more helpful to disaggregate them. But we just want to get kind of an initial sense of, if you're thinking about these two together, what rating would you give it overall? I see one thing in the chat. Okay, I know some people are popping out. Yes, please feel free to email Susan, and she's great about collecting resources. Put anything in the Miro board as well. Okay, I'm putting this in the chat. We'll send you off into breakout groups. Again, if you can spend the first few minutes rating these individually, that would be great. And then spend a little bit of time taking advantage of your small group, asking questions, maybe noting any large differences that participants are seeing. Okay. I will stop sharing. We'll send you into your breakout groups. And we will start to get close to wrap up.
I sent them in.
Perfect. Thanks.
I think we're losing a few more people, so we better hurry.
Sure. I did notice, or my group of banders noticed this year, we had a pretty steep decline on our broadtail hummingbirds. Our theory is a combination of those kind of vicious spring storms, in addition to fire and lack of habitat or foraging on previously burned areas. But those are just our best guesses at this time.
Yeah, so just real quickly, I'm up here in the breeding zone, up here, extreme northern edge of the Rufus breeding zone, and we're seeing, it seems like a consensus with the rest of our group, that the fire, when the males are leaving, and then 2 weeks later, 2 to 3 weeks later, the hatchiers are leaving and they're heading directly into areas that are on fire or have just been burned, and then having to shift quickly to find new areas can be just a huge burden. And on top of that, we have these increasing severe storm events at difficult times of the year. We have spring storms that are way colder, way higher winds, way a lot more precipitation right when the birds are arriving, or when they're breeding, and that's a huge mortality concern for them. But as far as what we were just talking about, far as strategies, for us, I think community engagement, the grassroots, from all else springs, we were talking about partnerships and having those conversations, sometimes unexpectedly, with people that can really spark some meaningful change and inspiration.
Great.
Thanks,
you.
Kate.
Yeah, so I'm just going to share my screen. I'm sure there's a lot more input from folks, but I just wanted to make sure we were able to glance at this before we wrap up. I know it's hard to see a lot of range when we're doing a single rating, but it was interesting. I just pulled up the non-breeding workshop results from just a few weeks ago, and good to see some consistency in maybe strategies that could address maybe a more holistic region of these Western migratory hummingbirds. And then maybe some of the ones that we're seeing might have lower impact. Some in the middle here, I think, where you can see where it may be more important for a specific geography than others. I did want to note that within some of these rankings, there was some variability. I'd say especially in this create quality habitat in urban areas, a lot of fours and then some ones here. Sarah, I'm not sure if you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you had a comment, I'd love for you to share for just a minute before we wrap up. Just that was one that was very noticeably distinct.
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm with BLM in Nevada. So most of our area is not going to have any urban centers. So for our district, that's not as important, especially for the zones that they're traveling through are, yeah, just not in urban areas for us, except for maybe Las Vegas area, maybe Reno. So that's not as important since we have so much open space for them traveling through.
Great, thanks for that. It's always good to get some context. And I think I mentioned it, but at any point after this, if any of you want to add comments for why you rated something specifically, if you right click, you can click comment here. And we're very open. We would love if we have any specific details. You all are the experts, and the whole point of getting all of you together is to get as much input as we can before the conservation plan and kind of what the Western Hummingbird Partnership decides they can focus on to move forward. So please add comments, please reach out. Susan, I'll speak for you, and I know you're always open to having people email you resources or comments. So we'd highly appreciate that. Knowing that we only have 4 minutes left, I want to stop sharing my screen and pass it back over to you, Susan, if you have any kind of final thoughts. And then one last time, I'm going to put that Miro board in the chat just as another resource for you to provide input if you think of something after we wrap up today.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and thanks so much for all that you've done for our process here. I want to thank all of you too. Some of you have been here every time, so we really appreciate that, and others have shown up for different sessions, or maybe this was your first, but we really appreciate your input and suggestions. This isn't the end. What we'll be doing is combing back through the recordings of these meetings, going back through your notes, going back through the results of the risks and your prioritization of those, as well as the strategies, and starting to put the pieces together into a format. But there's even work before that. And what I'm going to send out next week is a follow-up questionnaire for you to indicate where and how you might like to participate. I also feel like just these gatherings have been extremely valuable, and every webinar that we've hosted, whether it's focused on pesticides or this conservation plan, have been really well attended, received, and it's been an enthusiastic group. So I'm going to be asking questions about what we can do to continue to support hummingbird research and outreach and education, and if we can, do that through this virtual format, or do we perhaps want to someday think about a meeting or a gathering of all of us. We'd love to explore some of those ideas. And then again, for those of you who want to stay involved with the process of completing this conservation plan and coming up with the ideas about how we want to present it, I'll give you an option for staying involved and, keeping with the work that we still need to do. So again, thank you so much. Like Jacqueline said, please reach out, contact me, email me. Happy to take your thoughts, suggestions, and anything you have to offer. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. I'll
Oh,
put it in the chat here, but you all have been some of the most engaged participants, I think, that we've had in many types of workshops they've led. So thanks all. Sue, should we close it out, or do we need to stay on?
I think we're good. I think everybody's probably good to go and spend the rest of their afternoon. We'll, like I said, we'll be in touch. We're not letting you go.